Well, we do bring greetings of love in the precious name of Christ to each one this morning. Certainly it is a blessing to be here. And I was thinking as Gerald was sharing on the youth group, I don't want to take credit for where credit's not due. We were involved, but I remember Brother Isaac was very instrumental in how this all got set up. And sometimes I still think about the days we had that we overlapped with him and appreciate his wisdom in church leadership. So I can't take credit for things I didn't directly do, but we are blessed to be together, blessed to have a youth group, and also blessed. I was teaching in the instruction class this morning, and blessed that these young men and women that are filling out their books and doing a good job and answering questions. They're there. I know it's a reflection of parents, and I just want to say thank you. Thank you for that. It's just a real blessing to me to see these young lives growing and learning. Well, last Sunday, we were at Lincoln, and I got to hear Gerald bring a message on Mary. And as I was thinking about what to share this morning, I said something to Barb. I said, well, it seems right to share a message, something to do with Christmas. And I'll be bringing a message maybe a little more geared towards Matthew's version, or his what he writes about Christmas. So you could turn to Matthew. As I think about the gospel writers, Matthew, of course, brings out the genealogy as well, and then moves to Joseph, Mary and Joseph, and then to the wise men. And none of the other gospel writers tell the story of the wise men. And Luke, he would also comes out with a genealogy, a little different than Matthew's, but he writes about the shepherds, and none of the other gospel writers tell the story about the shepherds and about the angels rejoicing in heaven. And, so we put them together. John, he does not tell about the birth, actually. He tells about the incarnation of Jesus. The Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became man. He talks about that, and Mark would more delve right into Jesus' ministry, his healing and so forth. And they come across a little different, and you can almost tell in their heartbeat. Luke would come out more as portrayed Jesus as a friend of sinners or a friend of the poor, the common man. So he focuses on the shepherds, where Matthew would present Jesus as the king. And in Matthew's mind, we're going to go back and we're going to see what the prophets had to say. Well, we know the prophets spoke a lot about his birth. They did. And the Old Testament, those that remembered, were looking for some specific things. They were looking for somebody from the lineage of David, was top priority. David was promised. And also then Isaiah talked about the virgin birth. And so there's some factors that came in, but it seems like they kind of missed it for the most part, that this was the king. So in the message here on the wise men, if you're there in Matthew, if you look at Matthew chapter 1, very, very common thing through the Gospel of Matthew. In fact, at least 12 times in the Gospel. In verse 22, in Matthew chapter 1 says, "Now all this was done that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken of the Lord by the prophets, saying." And he goes on to say about a virgin shall be with child and shall bring forth a son. Thou shalt call his name Emmanuel, which is interpreted God with us. And so that is very common in the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew also focuses in very much on Jesus as king. So therefore, a lot of the book of Matthew has to do with the kingdom of heaven. The parables of the kingdom and Jesus' whole Sermon on the Mount has to do with the kingdom of heaven and the difference that this king is making. in the lives of each one of his followers. That Scripture might be fulfilled. I'm thinking of the words in 2 Peter chapter 1, and maybe we won't turn to that. I'll just kind of relay Peter's thoughts. Peter says, we are not following conning fables or, tales that people say. We might say, well, we're not following some old wise tales. Peter says, we heard that voice come from heaven on the holy mount, the Mount of Transfiguration. There was a voice, and we heard it. We testify this. We heard it. The voice said, this is my beloved Son, hear ye him. And Peter says, but you know what? There's something that is more sure than that, and that's the word of prophecy. We had these Old Testament prophets prophesy how many years before it actually happened. Is that supernatural? That's God at work in a big story that is unfolding. God told these prophets years and years ago, this is what's going to happen. And it's unfolding. He says, you know what? That's a more sure word of prophecy that's going to hold for generation after generation. And here we are 2,000 years later, and we still understand that God is in control. God knows the beginning from the end. God prophesies it, and it holds out exactly like he says. Genesis chapter 49, verse 10. And I'll be back to Matthew here. I just want to pick up a few of this and kind of get this thought of prophecies. And sometimes maybe the most unusual places and unusual ways. But here we have Jacob. Jacob is basically on his deathbed, and Jacob, he's given a blessing to his sons, and in that blessing he says something about his sons as well. And in Genesis 49 verse 10, maybe back to verse 9, or actually verse 8, he's talking about Judah. Judah, thou art he whom thy brothers shall praise. Thy hand shall be in the neck of thine enemies. Thy father's children shall bow down before thee. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion, and as an old lion, who shall rouse him up? Verse 10 is what I was really looking for. It says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh come, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. So here is Jacob, basically on his dying bed, his deathbed, and he talks about this scepter that shall not depart, or a lawgiver or a ruler. And if you follow Israel, yeah, they were under captivity even, they were enslaved, but nobody really ruled over Israel as such, as a king over Israel. Until when? Until Shiloh comes. King Herod, it's called Herod, the king of the Jews, was made king like 37 years possibly before Jesus was born, but it overlapped with Jesus' time. And he is the first one that actually sat, as it were, on a stolen throne in the kingship of David, sat as king of the Jews. Was Jacob's prophecy right? Years and years later, this was fulfilled. Amazing, amazing how God prophesied through or told Jacob what to say. So I guess as I think about the message this morning, and is it okay to have a message aim? I realize we ought to be moved with appreciation and gratitude for God, but if I would just give this message an aim, it would be to continue to seek the truth and worship Jesus with adoration and give our gifts to him, just like the wise men. As I studied and prepared and meditated on this again, I'm thinking, do I really pour in the energy to see Jesus, to seek him out? Do I in my daily devotions? I must say, I don't always. I don't always. Sometimes I read and I go on and I think, well, sometime later, what did I read this morning? Was I really looking? I think we all agree that Jesus is on every page of the Bible. There's something that brings out about Jesus. Am I seeking it out? So if I can encourage us here this morning to be faithful seekers, whatever the cost is, that we seek him out. He's there. In fact, in 1 Chronicles 28:9 says, and thou, Solomon, David speaking to Solomon, he says, and thou, Solomon, my son, know thou the God of thy father, and serve him with a perfect heart and a willing mind. Notice what it says here. For the Lord searcheth all hearts and understandeth all imaginations of the thought. If thou seek him, he will be found of thee. But if thou forsake him, he will cast thee off forever. And Jeremiah 29:13 says, and ye shall seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart. And that's the challenge for me. Am I searching with all my heart? Hebrews 11:6 says, but without faith it is impossible to please him. For he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is the rewarder of them that diligently seek him. So is it the desire of every heart here this morning to see Jesus? The wise men said, we have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him. And what is the purpose of our gathering together this morning? I trust is to see Jesus, and Jesus will be found of us. Jesus kind of has that character, that nature, I believe. You remember when he was walking with the two on the road to Emmaus, and he was telling them all these things, and their heart was burning within them, and they got to where they're going, and says, Jesus, come on in. They didn't know it was him. And he made as though he would have went further. And they had to say, now come on, it's getting dark. Come on in, at least have supper with us. And he came in and, of course, revealed to them who he was. But it seems like Jesus desires that we open ourselves up, that we beg him to come. He stands at the door and knocks. We open our heart's door, and his desire is to come in to sup with us. Let's read these verses at this time in Matthew chapter 2, the story of the wise men, or the account of the wise men. And think about, there's four, I kind of broke it up as four seekers. I had three, but I broke it up as four in the scripture. See if you could find them. Matthew 2, 1-15 says, and when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him. When Herod the king had heard these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he demanded of them when Christ should be born. And they said unto him, or where Christ should be born. And they said unto him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophets, and thou, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, art not the least among the princes of Judah, but out of thee shall come a governor, and he shall rule my people Israel. And Herod, when he had privately called the wise men, inquired of them diligently what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search diligently for the young child. And when ye have found him, bring me word again, that I may come and worship him also. And when they had heard the king, they departed, and lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them, till it came and stood over where the young child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding joy. And when they were come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented unto him gifts, gold, and frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned of God in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed into their own country another way. And when they were departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared unto Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise, take the young child and his mother, and flee into Egypt, and be there until I bring thee word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. And when he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night, and departed into Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, Out of Egypt have I called my son. I think I'll leave off reading there for now. But as I reflect on this, and I wonder, where did all the gift-giving things at Christmas come from? Is it all out of this scripture here, the wise men? Are we thinking about the gift that God gave us in his son? Or are we thinking about gold and frankincense and myrrh, the gifts that we give? I don't know. I don't know where. I didn't do any research where all the gift giving came from, but it can almost be a real distraction at Christmas time, a real commercialization at Christmas time that I think we ought to guard against and think about the real meaning of Christmas. And indeed, Jesus was prophesied that he would come and be born in Bethlehem of Judea. Understand there was another Bethlehem, and I failed to write down where it was exactly, but specifically Bethlehem of Judea. And it's interesting to know that Bethlehem means the house of bread. The house of bread. Is that a coincidence that Jesus was born in Bethlehem? The bread of life came to us in the house of bread. And also Bethlehem carries significance as the town of David, and about 6 miles from Jerusalem. And we have here that there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem. Just maybe thinking about seekers before we get into the wise men. The wise men were obviously earnestly seeking the truth. They had heard, there was not a shadow of doubt. They came to Jerusalem and said, Where is he? They didn't say, hey, you know anything about this? I seen a star come up. Is it something that we should be looking for or not? No, it was very positive. Without a doubt, where is he that is born King of the Jews? Very positive, very affirming. They were seeking, they were earnestly seeking the truth. The second seeker was King Herod. King Herod also set about to seek where the young child should be born, and kind of subtly says, well, I'd like to worship him too. Bring me word where he's at. The third seekers were the chief priests. And where did they seek? They went and they focused on the letter of the law, what is written in the prophets. And then I put down the fourth seeker. The fourth seeker is Mary, or Joseph and Mary, as guardians of the truth, seeking to keep that young child safe from Herod. So who were the seekers? What were they seeking? They were seeking he that is born King of the Jews. Again, they came thoroughly convinced that he was born. The wise men, the Bible calls them wise men. Who were the wise men? Sometimes we can think about this and say, well, who were they? Where did they come from? They came from the east. Could they have been the sons of Abraham? I don't know. It's a possibility. And why do we think that? If you can stay there in Matthew if you want. I'd just like to pull a verse up out of Genesis chapter 25. Gives a little insight into Abraham's children. So Abraham had Ishmael and Isaac was the promised child, the chosen child. And it says that Abraham gave all his things to Isaac, but he gave gifts unto his other children that he had through Keturah. Genesis 25 verse 1 says, And Abraham took a wife, and her name was Keturah, and she bare him Zimran. And I'm not going to read all these names, but if you drop down, there is Sheba in verse 3. Jocham begat Sheba, and we know that it was the queen of Sheba came to Solomon. So is this any validity here or not? And verse 5 says, And Abraham gave all that he had unto Isaac, but unto the sons of the concubines which Abraham had, Abraham gave gifts and sent them away from Isaac his son, while he yet lived, eastward unto the east country. So Abraham sent these children that he had away, gave them gifts, sent them away to the east country. And we know that there's one there that was Sheba. And then, of course, the next exposure to the east would have been Solomon. Solomon in 1 Kings chapter 4, in verse 30 to 34 says, And Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the children of the east country, and all the wisdom of Egypt, for he was wiser than all men. And lists the number of names there, and he spake 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. And he spake of trees, from cedar trees that is in Lebanon, even to the hyssop that springeth out of the wall. He spake of also of beasts, and of fowl, and of creeping things, and of fishes. And there came all people to hear the wisdom of Solomon from all kings of the earth, which had heard of his wisdom. So there again, we have Solomon with God's wisdom on him, and this word went out, traveled all over, that there's a king in Israel that is, his wisdom is just way beyond. And so we also have the queen of Sheba coming to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And in chapter 10 of 1 Kings, 23 and 24 kind of have the same thought. 1 Kings chapter 10, 23 and 24. So King Solomon exceeded all the kings of the earth for riches and for wisdom, and all the earth sought to Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God hath put into his heart. So were these wise men influenced by Solomon? Of course, we have Daniel, and we can't minimize Daniel. And the thing that is beautiful in this whole scope of God unfolding his plan is as well, when the children of Israel were carried into captivity by King Nebuchadnezzar, it clearly says that King Nebuchadnezzar took the books back to Babylon. And I imagine those books were studied, they were read, the prophets were read, that these wise men no doubt understood that there is a Redeemer coming. Back when God told Abraham to come out of the land of the earth of the Chaldees, I'm going to bless, and all the families of the earth are going to be blessed. They're going to be blessed by one that is coming from your descendants. And so it's not out of the realm of, obviously you can't say God's possibilities. God can extend anything. But these connections, when Daniel was in Babylon, God was magnified. And King Nebuchadnezzar says, all the earth needs to know that there's a God of Israel. The God of Israel is real. You remember what the image there, that represented, the stone that wasn't made with hands came and knocked that image over. And there's a kingdom that is going to be built that's going to go all the world around to Daniel. These wise men, no doubt, knew and understood. It's amazing that this thing reached into the Gentile world, and even the Jews missed it when they came. The wise men, the Bible calls them wise men for a reason. It had to be passed from generation to generation. And just maybe I'll read a few verses here yet. Psalm 72 is again amazing. The psalmist here writing, and many of these prophecies would have had a double meaning, may have carried with it when the psalmist wrote here, something pressing right then, but it also reached forward. Psalm 72 and verse 10 says, "The kings of Tarshish and the isles shall bring presents, and the kings of Sheba and Seba shall offer gifts. Yea, all kings shall fall down before him, all nations shall serve him, and he shall deliver the needy when he crieth, and the poor also, and him that hath no helper. He shall spare the poor and needy, and shall save the souls of the needy. He shall redeem their souls from deceit and violence, and precious shall their blood be in his sight. And he shall live, and to him shall be given of the gold of Sheba. Prayers shall be made for him continually, and daily shall he be praised." This is the psalmist. It says David praying for Solomon shows his glory of his kingdom in type and of Christ in truth, is what the heading is of that psalm. Amazing how God carried this right out. And, amazing that Matthew records this story for us of God's wonderful working. King Herod, on the other hand, was a descendant of Esau. He rebuilt the temple. He was a Jew in religion, but he was a heathen in practice, and he certainly was a monster in his character. He done all kinds of very evil, very wicked things. The chief priests were those that should have been aware of the promise. They should have been watching. They should have been ready when he came. They should have been waiting. In fact, Daniel specifically tells when this child is to be born. It's supposed to be 400 and I forget how many years that the Messiah will come. No doubt the wise men understood that from the east and were looking for this child to be born. Also, another interesting aspect of that is Balaam. The wise men followed the star. You remember Balaam was, I'm not sure what he was, or Balak, Balaam. He was a prophet, and yet he was not a good prophet. He was a prophet that got carried away for gain, and he prophesied that a star would arise. And that's in Numbers 24:17. I don't think we'll turn to that. But he prophesies that star. Were the wise men specifically looking for a star? Mary and Joseph, the wonderful truth was placed in their care. God spoke to Joseph, and it's as well as I read this, God spoke to Mary about the birth of the child, and Mary obviously agreed to that. But now it seems like, according to Matthew, God spoke to Joseph in a dream and says, "Go ahead and take Mary as your wife." He said in another dream, "Take the young child, flee to Egypt." And in another dream, he said, "You can return Herod's dead, those that sought his life." God is speaking to Joseph as the leader, as the head of the house, as in whom this young child was entrusted under his care. Thinking about the effects of the news of the birth of the King of the Jews, the wise men moved in faith. They were willing to sacrifice time and great expense to make the trip. Again, we don't know exactly where they came from, but possibly from Babylon, could have been 600 miles away. And no doubt there was more than three. Sometimes we think, well, there was three just because they gave three gifts. No doubt it was a whole caravan because the whole city was stirred, but we don't know. It's not important how many came. But their intent was very clear, and that was to worship and to give gifts. They wanted to personally worship the Christ child. The effects of the birth, the news of the birth, Herod moved in fear. He knew that he was sitting on a stolen throne, and he was determined to keep it at the expense of innocent lives. The chief priests, scribes were troubled. I don't know why they were troubled. I know economy was good right then. Roads were being built into Jerusalem. Everything was preparing for the Christ child to come. and the message to come in, go out. But why were they troubled? Shouldn't have they been rejoicing? I imagine they felt threatened in some way, and maybe it was economy, I don't know. But the third thing I'd like to look at is the method of finding Jesus. You know, I was, again, challenged as I thought about this. How did they find Jesus? The wise men sacrificed. They left whatever they were doing. I imagine they had things to do, places to go. They left it all. They said, we're going to Jerusalem. A difficult journey, a dangerous journey, maybe even a life-threatening journey, but we're going because we want to worship Christ. What have we given to follow Christ or to see Christ? Herod asked the chief priests and the scribes, and then he wanted the wise men to report back to him. And just so we don't come to the point where we think we can find Jesus by somebody else doing the legwork. We can read a lot of books. We can read a lot of good books. But I want to challenge us here this morning. It's really going to come down to my determination, my personal determination in the Word of God, if I'm going to find Jesus and worship Him. The chief priests went to the Scriptures. They searched the Scriptures. You know, and they said, Bethlehem of Judea. That's what Micah said. Micah said he's going to be born in Bethlehem of Judea, 6 miles away. Apparently that was too much. 6 miles wouldn't have took but 2 hours or so to walk. Why didn't they go looking for the Christ child? They didn't. They didn't. You know, close doesn't count. Jesus said, you have the Scriptures, and they are they that testify of me. I'd like to think now of worship. The primary focus of their journey was to worship. And I believe that these wise men were legitimate, real men that had a void that was not filled in all the Eastern religions. The worship of all these gods couldn't fill this void. Here was a group of men that says, this child's been prophesied. God of Israel is real. And this child is who we got to worship. Was there hopes in the promise to Abraham? We don't know. So I think about their desire to worship. Worship is to quicken the conscience by the holiness of God, to feed the mind by the truth of God, to purge the imagination by the beauty of God, and to open the heart to the love of God, devote the will to the purpose of God. Again, worship takes place on a one-to-one relationship with God. As I think about these wise men and their journey there, I was again thinking, how did they end up in Jerusalem? I somehow don't think that they were watching a star how many light years away to follow them. I mean, we can go miles apart and look up and see the Big Dipper. I think God gave them a star, just like He did the children of Israel. He gave them a pillar of fire to guide them by night. He gave them a star. But my gut feeling is that they left that star and they zoomed right to Jerusalem, because where should a king come? Maybe not. But why were they so excited when they left Jerusalem to head towards Bethlehem, and they saw the star again, and they rejoiced with Great joy. And they followed this star, and it went and stood over the house where the young child was. And I think sometimes we can run ahead of God. Sometimes we can lose the direction that God is leading us because we ran ahead. I don't know if they did, but I know I can do that. Very easily do that. Figure out where we're going. And so I just want to remind us this morning. If you're here this morning and you lost your peace, you lost your joy, you probably ran ahead of God. Go back to where you lost it. Get back on track with God and you'll find it. And there was great joy when they found that star. It came to the house where they were. The young child. I don't know what they were thinking. How should the king of the Jews come? Should he not come in a palace? Should he not come? I imagine they went to the house, a very simple house, a very simple, poor father, mother, a humble child. You know what? Didn't matter. Fell down, worshiped that child. They fell down and worshiped him. They opened their gifts. They presented this child the gifts. Amazing. Amazing. We're not told exactly how this story all unfolded, and it's not important that we're told. But Luke has us going. After the 40 days of purification, they go into the temple and they meet Simeon and Anna, and very clearly Mary understands again a confirmation this child is the Son of God. And Luke says that they departed, went back to Nazareth. So some of the early church writers said, yes, they went back to Nazareth, but they returned to Bethlehem because when the wise men find them, they are in Bethlehem of Judea. We don't know when it happened. Was it before the purification? It hardly seems like it because it's like immediately after that, Joseph has to take the young child and flee to Egypt for Herod. So time-wise is not a factor. But the child was young. The child was in Bethlehem. He may have been back to Nazareth for a time. He may have been a year or so old. Very obviously, he was under 2 years old. And I imagine Herod cushioned that a little bit, because Herod in his rage had all the baby boys killed 2 years and under. And again, Matthew says, just like Jeremiah said, the voice of weeping, crying is heard. Amazing. Nothing fell outside of the providence of God. Beware of God's signs that reveal him through nature and through the things that happen, and bow the head and worship. Again, I'm challenged by that through our everyday lives. Things that happen. This is not a coincidence. This is God at work. Bow the head and worship. We had one where I was reminded that, and it might seem kind of little to some. For some, it would have been a big deal. We had done a job, and all the sewer went into a pump, and then from there it's pumped out. And I know this sounds a little like changing the subject here, but the day before Thanksgiving, somebody was over there, and not by coincidence, they opened one of the caps on the sewer, and the sewer was up, almost up at floor level. And the guy called me and wondered what's going on. It's like, I don't know. There should have been alarms going. Are the breakers turned off for some reason? He went over, he said the breakers were off. He turned the breakers on, and the alarms start going, and the pumps start going. And I'm thinking, do we bow the head and worship? That wasn't a coincidence that he opened that. Why the breakers were off, I have no idea. These things happen. So if there's something I want to impress upon our minds is to be aware as we go through life. God is at work. Bow the head and worship. The gifts, gold was divinity. Again, these gifts were not randomly picked by whatever. God designed these gifts. The gold symbolizes divinity. And no doubt they used the gold to travel to Egypt. They were poor. They went into Egypt and were there a while. We don't know how long they were there. But it's a symbol of divinity. God provided frankincense. If you look at Exodus chapter 30 and verses 34 to 38, it was supposed to be used in worship and used only to worship God. Only to worship God. Anybody else who mixed this mixture up was to be cut off from Israel. Myrrh is a symbol of death, used in embalming. We don't know. Did Mary actually keep this until Jesus died on the cross? We don't know. And what gift did we bring this morning? Did we bring gold? Our soul, created in the likeness of God, the seat of our will, our emotion to be used in this life for His service? Did we bring frankincense, our spirit, as our worship and prayers? Did we bring myrrh, our bodies, that which will return to dust, but is a useful vessel in His hand? The wise men, again, warned by God in a dream, returned another way. And I am convinced that every encounter with Jesus demands a response. If we truly worshiped this morning, we'll go home not the same way. Wise men will be ready when He comes. Matthew 25, again, Matthew talking about the wise and the foolish. The wise were ready. When Christ returned, the foolish were not. Let's be wise. Let's seek God diligently every day of our life, and you will find joy and peace that Christ alone can bring. Let's kneel before the Lord in prayer.